Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Quinlan Eddy, and I am the CEO and co-founder of OneCloud. And today we're going to talk about simplifying EPM data integration with an Anaplan Runbook. I'm very also pleased to be joined here today with James Wakefield of Servian. And James, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then we'll go through the agenda for today.
Thanks, Quinn. Great to be here. I'm James, and I'm the EPM Practice Lead here at Servian, and we're partners with both Anaplan and OneCloud.
Great, James. Thanks for that introduction. If you could actually move to the next slide, and we'll get through the agenda here. So today we're going to walk through, actually we'll probably a little ahead of ourselves right now, but walk through some additional background about ourselves, but just discuss what the business problem is, why automation integration is so key, especially around the implementation of with Anaplan and with other applications that support our performance management environment. And we'll also have a live demo today as well. James is going to take us through a Runbook example with Anaplan in combination with OneCloud. And then at the end, we're going to open it up to Q&A. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, please just use the chat window directly inside the Zoom client, and you can post your questions there, and we'll get those queued up at the end to provide answers. And if there's anything else that comes up, feel free to send James or myself an email. We'll have contact information at the end of this presentation. So James, next slide. So I did get ahead of myself here, just a little bit about myself. Again, CEO of OneCloud, and I've been in the Oracle EPM space and Anaplan space pretty much my entire career. I've been really excited about the whole concept of integrating and automating applications and bringing these applications together so that you really have one place to actually manage and control how these integrations work together in a code-free and easy manner. And James, I'm going to pass it back to you again so that you can actually also introduce Servian in a bit more detail about yourself.
Thanks, Quinn. So I've been working in the EPM space now for 20 years. Vast majority of that has been in either working with T1s, planning analytics as it's now known, and last 5 years pretty much exclusively around the Anaplan capability. And if there's one thing I've found in 20 years, it's that the success of your EPM project is going to be based around the data that you supply to it. The old phrase of rubbish in, rubbish out absolutely applies to your EPM project. So using your integration capability to simplify and automate it is absolutely key to success. So just a little bit about Servian. So Servian has been established since 2008. Our mission is to enable our customers to use data and analytics to build a competitive advantage. So over the last 12 years, Servian has now grown to being over 540 employees. Those are offices based across pretty much every state in Australia, plus now New Zealand with Auckland and Wellington, and an increasingly growing office over in the UK as well. And we've got a lot of top-end large customers that are really moving a lot of their data and analytics across to the cloud and needing help in terms of not just the data analytics across that, but also their planning and forecasting and budgeting needs. There's obviously unprecedented times at the moment, and that's put a lot of strain on finance departments to be able to reforecast balance sheets, cash flows, their liquidity positions. And so we've been working with a lot of Anaplan customers across being able to implement that capability. So Servian operates across a number of different domains. So the data analytics, an increasing amount of AI need through organizations, through chatbots, video analysis, digital, to be able to create websites, mobile apps, distribute the data out to the right people at the right time, customer engagement, knowing who your customers are, how best to communicate with them, and of course, cloud. So being one of the largest consultancies across both AWS, GCP, and Azure, it puts Servian in a great place to be able to transition customer workloads across to the cloud. And that's where a lot of the projects start off in an advisory capability to help people imagine the art of the possible, and then actually doing the consulting project to be able to deliver on outcomes. And then a number of customers have also wanted to transition across to a managed services capability to be able to allow someone to be able to manage the solutions that are being created for them.
And just a bit about OneCloud. So OneCloud is a technology. It's a iPaaS technology designed specifically for the various applications that support the line of business. So FP&A or sales performance management or various different areas that typically need an application that will better connect and automate these apps that we use, such as Anaplan. Typically, in the absence of a technology like OneCloud, often you have a lot of custom code or maybe manual processes. So in the case of Anaplan, maybe, for example, uploading imports and manually running processes and import actions and so forth. These all can be streamlined through the use of OneCloud. So you really have one tool to rule them all so that it can sit in between these applications and allow you to orchestrate each one of those steps for a true end-to-end process. And again, with out-of-the-box capabilities that support the various applications. And just a bit about the apps that OneCloud does support. So, various apps like file storage, like Box and Google Drive, in combination with systems of record, all sorts of systems of record like Microsoft Dynamics or Workday, combination with relational or tabular data sets, performance management. So Anaplan is a big support for OneCloud, but also there are other technologies such as maybe some legacy Hyperion or Essbase, for example, TM1 that need to be intertwined with the mix. And then finally, just jumping out to the right, BI reporting, so technologies like Power BI, Tableau, or Workiva, all for that last mile of financial reporting or analytics on top of the data that gets enriched in technologies like Anaplan. And just finally, OneCloud is a Anaplan technology partner. Recently added to the team there, and more information is available at anaplan.com/partners, tech partners. And more information will also be coming out here shortly as a broader announcement is made about this recent technology partnership. And lastly, just a little bit about just the architecture of OneCloud here today. James is going to be doing a demonstration that showcases the integration of various applications, primarily just Anaplan, but Snowflake and Salesforce that coexist in the cloud. But if there are times in which you need to have, let's say, integration with an on-premise application, then OneCloud can also deploy that with what's called a ground runner. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's important just to see how the various pieces and components hang together with OneCloud to make these on-premise and cloud applications seamless from an application perspective.
So as Quinn outlined, I'm going to take you through when working with a very forward-thinking client, we came across a business problem that actually seemed to be around for many years within this industry. And this client was able to really come up with a solution that we thought was really beneficial to many organizations out there. And so I'm going to step you through what that problem was and how we went about solving it with the client. So what business needs today? So when it comes to data integration in your enterprise performance management projects, it's my belief that it's important to ensure that you have a trust in the process of sourcing the data. As I mentioned, if you've got rubbish in, then you're going to get rubbish out. And if there's one thing that business users struggle with, if you present the wrong data to them, you're going to lose their trust pretty quickly within a project. So you need to be able to make sure that you can easily integrate into your source systems. And we're increasingly seeing those source systems not being your on-premise systems. So many organizations have been moving towards the cloud and embracing cloud technology. And with everybody starting to do more and more work from home under the current circumstances, being able to integrate into those source systems that are based in the cloud, you're going to need to be able to use the APIs that those systems have been able to expose to you. So being able to utilize those APIs and the security permissions that are associated with them. So if you're now finding that your data warehouse is now stored in Google BigQuery or Snowflake or Redshift, you need to be able to integrate easily with those systems and be able to show users that they can trust the information coming through from it. The other key thing a lot of clients really want to ensure is the automation of your data. So with the increasing worldwide nature of projects, different time zones, more and more people working from home, so doing work out of hours, it's important for people to be able to have flexibility so that they can set off integration patterns to be able to execute not just overnight, but manually, or maybe on different days of the week. Do a schedule different on Wednesday that's different to maybe Thursday, that's different to the second working day of the month from the third working day of the month. So it's important that with these different demands on the finance function, that business users within these areas can actually update these integration settings without being a technical guru. Gone are the days where you need to integrate some data and you've got to phone up somebody or send them an email to be able to get that integration pattern happen. You need to be able to make it as easy as possible and as flexible as possible for people to get their data into their enterprise performance management systems. So quite often within businesses, they've actually typically gone to the solution of using your traditional ETL tool. But ETL tools are typically built without really understanding enterprise performance management systems. Those systems are typically created for very complex needs. They need to be able to process billions of records, do complex joins, be able to allow a technical user to be very technical. Now, those ETL solutions are not something that your traditional business user is going to be able to orchestrate and edit. But the business user and the IT function have to come to an agreement around how the business is going to be able to execute these data loads. And so quite often what we found in organizations is that they've come to a midpoint and agreed to being able to edit some text files or some batch scripts that are going to allow the business user to indicate when something should be run in what order, maybe at what time through Windows Scheduler or some other scheduling organization tool. But it's a text file, it's a batch file. And that comes with your traditional problems of having no auditability, no workflow. Security is limited by probably your Windows folder security, and most importantly, no ease of use. So no drop downs for the users to be able to validate what data should be entered in what place. So the solution, so as mentioned, working with a client, and I think it is quite often the case that clients, users, they actually come up with the best solutions. They're the ones that are actually living this stuff day in, day out. It's their business pain. So by listening to clients and users and incorporating that into solutions or products, you're going to get the happiest customers. So what the client that we were working with came up with was the ability to create a runbook that was housed within Anaplan. They were using Anaplan very extensively within their business and wanting to ensure that a business user could edit the integration loads that were happening within different business function areas, allow people to take responsibility and ownership for those data integration patterns. And what we were able to show within the business, that by using a OneCloud, a Runbook that was housed within Anaplan, but then using OneCloud to be able to export that information and do all the orchestration data loads, and then feed information success criteria, allowed the user to be able to get useful information back. That meant that the ownership was going to be a lot easier for the company overall. And by housing the Runbook in an Anaplan module, I mean, the same could be done within TM1 if you're a TM1 customer, to be able to use data validations, to be able to control what users update what areas. But by housing it within an Anaplan module, you get then validated data, auditability of who changed what, when, and where. Most importantly, ease of use in a system that the user is already comfortable, and the security is then naturally part of your deployment. So the best way we thought was to actually show you a live demonstration of this. So I'm going to go now into Anaplan and take you through a walkthrough of how I set up the module, the cube in here. And what we've done is also create a step-by-step guide on how you can actually create this yourself. The great thing about this pattern is that you're not restricted in any way. You can actually tailor this to suit your circumstances, your organization, how you see this benefiting yourself. But within the example that I've created here, what I've done is created a two-dimensional module, cube, if you were. And in this particular case, within Anaplan, I've created it via a numbered list. So a user on the fly can create new items to be able to go into that list. Allowed the description to update the name of that list automatically. And then I've set up a number of columns that allow the user to choose a data integration pattern and then set configurations options around that. So using the ability to set this up as a drop-down list, we're allowing the user to say whether the pattern is going to be an Anaplan process that needs to be run, querying a Snowflake table to return a set of information, querying an on-premise SQL Server database, extracting information from Salesforce, or maybe moving information across into Workiva to provide management or board reporting. So what we've done now is to allow for the user, based upon selecting Snowflake, you need to return that information via a SQL statement. So being able to house the SQL statement that's going to return that information. And then the Anaplan upload of that information requires you to specify what workspace that it's going to land the data into, and then what model within that workspace. So providing the IDs with then a formula to allow for the lookup of the friendly names, so users are able to identify that they've selected the correct ones. As I scroll to the right, I've added in some additional capabilities in here. Sometimes you want to be able to create a unique ID, and being able to tick that on or off allows a user to be able to select that. Identifying what the name of the file you want it to be when it uploads into Anaplan. Identifying whether there's header records associated with it. One of the facilities that the Anaplan API allows is for the ability to chunk your data loads. That means that you're able to execute data loads in parallel up into the cloud and make them faster. So being able to provide an option for them. Some of these might actually be just preset or by a formula if you wanted to make it even easier. And then specifically if you're running an Anaplan process to provide the name, I added in here a run order. So that allowed you to add in any item at any stage, but then a run order would allow you to be able to sort at what time, in what order each one of these jobs should be executed. And then a notification email so that you can be able to receive any error messages or updates or summaries of those jobs that have been executed. And then last but most important is if you've set this information up, the most simple thing now is for a user to be able to come in and say, yes, I want to be able to load this job and I'm going to activate it, or I don't want it to run overnight, so I'm going to deactivate it and untick it. So by being able to select for a user to be able to go in and activate or unactivate all of those different options, it becomes a much easier interface for you to then expose this module into your dashboards or front ends. So all the user needs to do is tick a box, and then that job is going to execute exactly as specified. But at any stage, because this is housed within an Anaplan module, you will always have the ability then to go in and also check who changed what, when, and where, as well as the security being provided across the top of the module as to who can update this information or not. So as mentioned, this is an example, and we've provided a step-by-step guide of how you might set up this, but it's really your decision around how much you want to be able to allow the user to interact with these, how many columns you want to expose or not. Some of these you might hide from the user. The beauty is the flexibility that you can offer. So from a next step, we're actually going to load information into Snowflake. And to do that, I thought, well, to begin with, what we'll do is show data coming into Snowflake, but first of all, let's clear out the information in there. So first of all, I'm going to clear everything out and just refresh so that we can see here that there is now nothing within the Anaplan modules here. All that data has been cleared. But now what I'm going to do is click on a link to be able to execute the Runbook via OneCloud. So by clicking that link, it brings us directly into OneCloud. Now, OneCloud is set up in chains. Those chains execute a number of commands in there. It's all drag and drop. so that the user can just change a couple of settings, execute, and see the results. So if I just go back one step here, these are the chains that I've created based upon that runbook in order to extract the runbook, filter the records that I want to be able to execute, and call the right sub chain to be able to execute that based around the native integration patterns that OneCloud exposes. So the master chain is this runbook chain. And then as it goes through each record, if it's a Snowflake record that it needs to process, it's going to call the run Snowflake to Anaplan chain. If it's a Salesforce record that needs to be processed, it'll call the run Salesforce to Anaplan. So if we go back into the runbook here, and we can see just when it was last updated, but coming across here, as well as just being able to run this chain, I'm going to actually go into the edit area and show you step by step how each one of these was actually created. So the first thing we're going to do in the start area here is we're going to run an export action to return all the rows and columns that we had set up within that Anaplan module. So by going into the details of this command, we can see here that it's using an Anaplan connection, depending whether you're using the CA certificates for your security or not, and you're able to set up the connection exactly as you need. And then over here, we can choose whether it's going to execute in the Cloud Runner, which is where you're able to have everything running in the cloud, or whether you want to execute it on a ground runner, which is then behind your firewall and able to be running on premise if you so desire. So I'm going to execute this against a specified Anaplan workspace ID, and this has actually been defined by a variable. So with the thought of inputting the information once and reusing it wherever possible, you can set up a variable, and I've set up 2 text variables here, and those can then be used at any part of my chain. So by clicking those, it will then set this variable at runtime. And so I'm identifying the workspace and the model, and then I've written in here the export action name that I want to be able to execute, and that's going to return me then a CSV file of this name here that I can then use in my other commands further downstream. So upon success of us exporting the information from the Anaplan module, which contains all the runbook information that we need, we're then going to execute 2 commands in parallel. You can see here that for each one of these lines, we can choose whether this next command is executed upon success, upon failure, upon error, so that we have control then of saying, well, if there is an error, take a different path, notify a different person. This gives us the flexibility to be able to capture and orchestrate how we want the life cycle of this information to run. So first of all, it's going to get a number of Snowflake options. And here we've got a command here against get Snowflake. And within here, what we want to do is to be able to download the runbook that was in Anaplan. And here we can specify that we're going to have the Anaplan downloaded file be passed into here as a file that it can actually query. And so once you've actually specified this file, you can then actually go and tell it how to retrieve or filter information. Now, there's a number of different methods that you can use to do this. OneCloud out of the box allows you to filter rows, columns, do skips and everything. Personally, what I've done here is provided a SQL statement to run over the top of a CSV file that's been provided from the Anaplan export. Why did I do this? Well, it's a simple way for me to be able to easily say, bring everything from that CSV file, select star, and then filter it where data integration by a column equals Snowflake, and the active flag is set to true. But importantly, what I've also stated here is to do an order by on the run order. So any stage, by changing within the runbook, whether it's index number 1 or index number 3, I can actually dynamically change the order in which those ones are run. And this is where you really get a lot of the flexibility on a front-end user to be able to choose how they want their data to arrive into their EPM system. So by doing the filtering, I'm now going to then have an output in a comma delimited, so a CSV file, and I'm going to preview those results so that I can understand what got filtered and be able to then do additional logic over the top of it. So after I've filtered to retrieve just the Snowflake runbook commands that I want to execute, I will then pass that into the chain that is set up specifically to be able to run the Snowflake to Anaplan jobs. And I'm going to pass in the results of that command so that it then flows it through into the next chain. The ability to make your chains as modular as possible and reuse them means that you can just develop so much faster across your data integration patterns. So on the other side, remember that you're executing in parallel. I'm also doing a get Salesforce. And within here, in a similar sort of way, I'm saying pass in the file that we've downloaded from Anaplan. But in this case here, I want to choose select all the columns, but where my data integration pattern is via Salesforce and its active is true. And then order it by the run order, so I execute them in the correct order that the user wants and output it in a comma delimited format.
Hey, James, one of the participants just asked a question. Does this command require a relational database? And I thought I would just chime in here, just since you had that highlighted. The answer is no, it does not require a relational database at all. Even though you're looking at SQL here, this is an inline advanced transformation. And it's something that allows you, as James mentioned, to quickly and easily filter or perform different types of operations directly. Won't get into a lot of detail, but I thought I would at least highlight this as you're walking through this.
Thanks, good. So after we filtered to get the Salesforce records, we will then call the run Salesforce to Anaplan chain, and we will pass in the results, the text file CSV that has been output from the previous command there. So if we now go into the chain that's actually running the Snowflake jobs, what we will be able to see is if we go and edit Snowflake to Anaplan, when this chain is called, there is a runtime input that is required for this chain to actually run, which means that a file is passed into it dynamically at runtime, and this is going to be the CSV file produced of the Snowflake records that we want to be able to run. By passing those files dynamically from one chain to the other, it just means that we can reuse this chain over and over again for lots of different purposes in lots of different ways. The next step that we've done here is in the runtime input, we provided it a CSV file. But CSV files are not the greatest file to do stuff with. So if we now convert that file from CSV to JSON, JSON is a much more structured file set. It allows us to loop around it much more easily. It has a key value pair capability that is just so much easier to extract information from and do stuff with. So although that sounds complex, all I'm doing is creating a command that says CSV to JSON and passing in the file that was provided to me. OneCloud does the rest of it for me. And all I'm then doing is using the result of this in my next command. So this next command here looks slightly different. And that's because what we've done is we've grouped here two command sets together. This command here, the execute query, is a specific Snowflake command that you can see. And all of these little pictures relate to the different connectors that you have available to you to interact with. So this one here is specifically a Snowflake command. And what we're going to use this one for is to run that SQL statement that I identified earlier against Snowflake and return information from it. Now, as I execute this, I might have one record, 2, 3, maybe as many as I want. And for each time I want to query this database, I then want to query, return the result set, and then upload that information then to Anaplan. So by grouping these two commands together, what it means is that if I go in and show you the edit, I can actually run the execute query, and then because these are set to run in serial, it will then go and execute the next command, which in this case is the upload command. And then because we've set this to do an iteration, this is essentially like a loop. So for every record within the runbook where we want to query tables and return that information, we're going to loop, execute the SQL against Snowflake, load it to Anaplan, then come back and for the next record, execute the query against Snowflake, load it to Anaplan until we run out of number of records that we want to loop around. So here, the file that we want to loop around is just that JSON file that we've selected here. And so to set this up, all I did was select that and press save. And that's all you need to do to provide the loop around those records. So within the Snowflake command itself, what we're identifying here is that we're going to issue a command against our Snowflake connection within our Cloud Runner, and we're going to pass into it dynamically a SQL statement. And that SQL statement is then going to run against Snowflake and return us a CSV file. If we want to, we can change it from being a CSV file to pipe delimited, and then preview those results. So within our parameter here, we're able to just select that we want the information returned from the JSON, and it's going to be coming from the SQL statement key that we want to return that information. From the Anaplan command, if we just have a quick look at this one, we can see that we're connecting to Anaplan, and then from the Runbook itself, dynamically returning the information of the workspace ID, the model ID, the server file name that we set, the source file name that we set, and I can enhance this to pass in really any information required to execute this command. Well, it's executing this dynamically for each row of that runbook. So as you change that setup within the runbook, all of this is going to be dynamically executing based around those drop-downs that you chose within the Anaplan module. So that's it for how it's going to execute and return information from Snowflake and load it to Anaplan. If I just quickly show you that from Salesforce, if I have a look at this command, it's actually almost identical. There is only one difference in this chain, and that is that this is specifically connecting to Salesforce, authenticating against Salesforce, and then issuing the SQL statement that we put into the runbook for that particular command, and the Salesforce connection. Salesforce allows you to query itself with the equivalent of SQL as well. So you're able to return information from all your accounts and organizations and opportunities, just like you were querying a typical sort of SQL database. So by passing that dynamically in, runtime pattern that is very similar at this stage to our Snowflake integration. So the last part of this before we actually execute it and show it running dynamically is after we've loaded this information from Snowflake into Anaplan, loaded the information from Salesforce into Anaplan, we then want to run a number of internal Anaplan processes to be able to load the CSV files then into lists or modules within Anaplan. So in a similar sort of way, we're filtering from the runbook where the data integration by equals Anaplan and the active equals true. Once we've been able to filter the runbook rows that we're going to execute, we can then call the run Anaplan process chain, which is then going to pass in the results of that filtered row set that gives the chain all the information it requires to run. So if I then show the last bit of the puzzle, which is running an Anaplan process, and if we edit this one, we can see it passes in a file, converts it from CSV to JSON so that we can loop around it and extract all the information that we desire. And then here we can run an Anaplan process within Anaplan. We're going to loop around all the rows that we need to execute and then pass in dynamically the workspace ID, the model ID, the process name, and display any results or errors that might have happened. At this point, it's worth noting as well for each one of these commands, at the top here, today all I've shown you is the settings area, but additionally what we have here is the ability to do additional logic over the top of this command. So if I click on the notifications tab, what I'm doing specifically on this one here is if I'm now running these Anaplan processes, if there is any error when this runs, I'm going to notify myself via email with a dynamic email subject header line that there has been an error, and I'm going to attach the Anaplan logs to it. So when you're running data integration patterns, the last thing you want, and this applies equally to whether this is Anaplan, TM1, Airspace. If you are running integration jobs, you don't want to run a job and then have to VPN into a system, find then a remote desktop connection, connect to the right drive to be able to see a log file that's been produced, remember where that log file is, order it by time executed, look for the right name. Why? When in fact you can just receive that log file via email, open it up directly, see what the error is and correct it immediately. Additionally, you can provide commands to be able to skip certain conditions. So the ability to say on success, do this, on error, do that, means that you have the flexibility to skip over things if you don't want them to happen. You can produce dynamic outputs to flow into other chains logic. And you can also see specific information around error conditions live. So against each of those connections that we talked about today, when you connect to those systems, if there is an error, those APIs in the background are giving you rich information around why something happened. So here what we're doing is identifying common errors that you're able to see then a business-friendly error name against. So have you chosen the wrong workspace ID? Have you provided an invalid file path? This is what's going to help you solve integration issues faster by using that rich information. So having walked you through each one of those steps, there is nothing better than actually seeing it live. So now what we're going to do is to go into the master chain runbook here and execute this one. So we can actually just schedule this to run at a specific time. You can see previous last runs, but I'm just going to go straight in and execute this chain now. And as I run this chain, what you're seeing live is this command now executing. As they go green, each one of these are running. So you can see these two are now executing in parallel. It's going so fast that I need to speed up to be able to show you what's happening at each one of these. So the export action has actually downloaded from the Anaplan Runbook 12 records here. Those 12 records were these 12 records here that have been returned from the Anaplan module. Within the logs area, you can see it connecting to Anaplan. It successfully connected, downloaded the file. The file was 12 records and of this size. We then went and filtered to get the snowflake rows. It filtered it to return 6 rows. If we look at the logs area, and this happened in 2 seconds here, that we filtered the rows, and these were the rows that it returned that matched the conditions that we wanted it to. From the Salesforce side, it returned 4 records, and these were the 4 records that it found that matched our filter criteria. Back here in Anaplan's Runbook, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 records that were returned to execute 6 SQL statements in Snowflake, and 4 records that were against Salesforce. Next, we came down to actually run those Snowflake commands. And if we click here to follow the link through to the chain that was run, we can see we passed in a CSV file. We've then converted it to JSON to be able to loop around. And here, within this group, remember that we were executing a Snowflake query, uploading to Anaplan, executing a Snowflake, uploading to Anaplan. So by doing this as a loop, what we can see here in the outputs is, bearing in mind it's starting at 0, we can see that there was 6 loops that were done, 6 values that we can see the information against. So starting at the first one, we can see that it returned 30, almost 40,000 records from Snowflake. And of those 40,000, we can see the configuration options that were passed in, the SQL statement that was run. So doing this select star from the fact finance. This is, by the way, just your traditional Northwind database that everybody who's ever been involved in the SQL database will know. Well, this is just that similar finance information loaded into Snowflake and returning all your GL balances. And there's essentially 40,000 balances here that have been returned against organization, department keys, etc. in here. And these are the sample records out of that 40,000 that have been returned. After we queried the Snowflake information, we then uploaded it to Anaplan. So here we have those same 39,410 records that were uploaded to Anaplan. The file size, and if I really want to look at the detailed logs, I can go and see the information detail around it, connecting and returning that. Now I can jump into the next record it did, and here we're actually see that we can see the within Snowflake, the next record produced 3,652 based upon querying from the dim date table and uploading then that information, those 3,652 then into Anaplan and against that value there. So we can audit and understand each step of the query that we did to Snowflake and the upload that we did to Anaplan and validate row counts, file sizes. We can send emails that indicate a summary of that information returned so that you can actually fully audit that whole exercise as well. Within then, at the same time as we were executing the Snowflake to Anaplan, we can go and see the Salesforce to Anaplan. Here in the monitor section, we can see every chain that's been executed by anybody that has access to the system. We can see filter by success or failures, different tags that we've put against them. So I've allowed the filter maybe by different source systems here. But if I go and have a look at the Salesforce to Anaplan, we can see in a similar way when we executed this that we were able to see the 4 loops that we did to return information from Salesforce and upload to Anaplan. So looking at this first one here, we can see that it connected to Salesforce, the Salesforce account table, lists maybe all our customers that we're interacting with, returned then the rows associated with that, and passed it through to Anaplan, showing that we've uploaded 13 accounts to Anaplan, and here's the detail behind that. If we then go to the next one, we can see that it's executed against the Salesforce opportunities to load that information from our Salesforce opportunities, because maybe we want to do some modeling around go-get percentages around our CRM pipeline. So then last of all, we ran, once the data was loaded from Snowflake and the data was loaded from Salesforce, the Runbook has then provided the Anaplan processes information that we want to be able to run within Anaplan to populate our lists and our modules with metadata and data. So what we can see here now is it's done a loop of 2 Anaplan processes that needed to be executed. If I then go into the logs and scroll down, I've got all the information available to me then around what was executed, how many rows were loaded, how many were successful, and in some of these, I've actually deliberately left some that were unsuccessful. So as I scroll down here, these were successful. This one here, out of 38,000 records loaded, 1,000 of them failed. So where was it? It was when we were loading the account keys, and likelihood there was duplicates that we were trying to load. And so we can then go and rectify that. And because we had some errors associated with this, that is why this command here is colored yellow instead of a green, because this one had some errors, but it wasn't actually stopping anything from being processed. These were just things that needed to be evaluated and looked at and potentially understood. So because the Runbook setup is a very flexible orchestration pattern, if you wanted to, you could then also load all of this rich information then back into Anaplan. So against each one of these rows, you could actually load, when it was last executed, number of rows done, the time it took to do it. And so then coming back to our dashboard and refreshing our dashboard here, we can now see that data has been loaded into Anaplan. This was the information that we loaded via the Runbook. And if we want to go and rerun this, we can just click on the link to go back to the Runbook and be able to run it directly from within here. So we've pretty much gone through how to build it, how to execute it, what the success looks like, but that was a lot of information in a short period of time. And that's why we've created an actual, not just a demonstration of this, but a blog post to be able to walk people through how you can do it yourself and a step-by-step guide to be able to do it. So that pretty much covers the live demo. I guess at this stage, Quinn, did we want to point out anything that I might have run through too fast or go straight to the question and answers?
That was an absolutely perfect demonstration, James. Excuse me. Thank you so much. And we did have a couple questions, which I did answer live. And just in case you might have missed them, there was someone who asked, can OneCloud or does OneCloud require a ground runner? And I answered that in the chat, but the answer to that is no. You can have OneCloud be 100% cloud with only a cloud runner. So that's what James demonstrated today, is just a pure cloud-to-cloud integration with no requirement for a ground runner. And there was a second question around support for BigQuery, Google BigQuery that is, and we do indeed support Google BigQuery. But that really was a phenomenal demonstration. Learned quite a bit myself here, James. I love the way Anaplan can be incorporated, excuse me, into a Runbook, and to appreciate all the great work that went into this. But with that, James, do you have anything else that you wanted to add here?
No, just to comment again that I think the best feedback loops are always when clients and organizations come across a pain point, and then a solution is then worked through with maybe the experts around that solution, and then products that are being used are enhanced by it. That feedback loop is how really users benefit from great products being helping businesses to run more efficiently. And that's why I think the EPM space has always probably needed more innovation happening, faster innovation, and now really is the time when people should be looking to do that. So Servian and OneCloud would really like to understand business issues that you're facing to make your jobs easier, so that we can provide those solutions to you, and most importantly, automate it for you. It's one thing to get off Excel spreadsheets, but then the last thing you want is to find yourself hampered by complex scripting code or batch files. You want to be able to automate as much as possible, especially when you're potentially working from home.
Well, with that, we'll conclude the webinar, and want to thank everyone here for your participation, and would absolutely love to stay in touch with you. And here's how. And thank you so much for joining today. And thank you, James, especially for this great webinar, and as well as being a guest blogger on the OneCloud blog site. Thanks so much, and have a great day.